It's Think Aorta Thursday, symptoms of a dissection. When your symptoms are ignored or misdiagnosed. Many of the aortic dissection survivors in our community were lucky enough to go to a hospital where emergency physicians recognized their symptoms or connected the dots when hearing about their family medical history. And they ordered a life-saving CT scan. Unfortunately, there are many community members who had a very different experience. Some spent hours waiting in the emergency room. Others were actually sent home. The worst stories come from patients that know their family history, can clearly articulate that information, and are still sent home without a CT scan. We have asked community members to share some of their symptoms and ER experiences with the medical community in hopes of teaching emergency physicians to think aorta and order a CT scan. Here we have an account by a community member named Michael R. And he says, I felt like I was on fire from the inside out and had nonstop nausea and vomiting. The hospital staff ordered an EKG, no heart attack. Then they sent me back to the ER waiting room. Prashant J shares, I heard the pop and drove myself to the hospital. My left leg was numb by the time I got there, but I didn't have too much pain in the chest. I was slightly dizzy. Told hospital my dad passed at 30 and his granddad passed at 56. And either I was having a stroke or heart attack. They did an ECG or an EKG, said I was fine and that I sprained my leg and chest and sent me home. Just can't. Nate S. shares, intense shooting pain down my back. I was also having discomfort in my left leg and difficulty walking. They ended up sending me home with pleurisy. It was a very small hospital, so I'm sure they didn't have a CT or even an MRI. Finally, a simple chest x-ray showed an enlarged aorta, which then led to a CT. Our Karen A. shares, felt an initial pop in my neck, followed by intense acid reflux, then a sudden loss of feeling in my arms and legs. The whole time I thought it was my Crohn's disease. I was lucky to have an immediate CT at the hospital, only to find I had a type A dissection and was transferred to the larger hospital, where while in surgery, I dissected down to my iliac. Ruru F. shares, hubby had sharp pain very high between shoulders and under throat, then freezing hands and feet, sort of mental spaciness, then urinary incontinence. Syncope episode with vomiting ×2. Finally, projectile vomiting in ER. And my insistence that his odd symptoms seemed to be organ failure led to a heart enzyme test. One was slightly elevated, which led to a lung embolism test. 200 times elevated, which finally led to CT with contrast. Life flight, 16 plus hour surgery, etc. She did note, before then, EMTs had come and gone, and ER had attempted to discharge him 4 times, and I refused. Karen B. shares, no pain, passed out. ED thought I had overdosed or was stroking. AD eventually found when nurse suggested my aorta should be checked via CT. The aortic dissection was eventually found when the nurse suggested they put her through a CT. Annette R. shares, my family doctor sent me home with a diagnosis of a strained shoulder and stomach bug. I called 911 an hour later when my entire torso felt like it was electrified. She is a dissection survivor. Rhonda W. shares, my husband sat dying in the hospital 3 days trying to figure out what was going on before they went in to fix his aortic valve and discovered the problem. His other 5 family members did not survive it, an aortic dissection. She notes 13 years later, it was discovered that AHTV runs in the family. If you have experienced something similar, please consider sharing your experience with us in hopes of teaching more medical professionals to think aorta and help increase diagnosis time. You can share that information by sending it to info@aortichope.org. And Joshua, these stories send chills down my arms and legs. These are very
Yeah.
upsetting diagnosis. Anyway.